Emily here. Today I'm going to discuss chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Daisy Miller by Henryjames. So settle down, tune in, take some notes, and if you are a lit student or you're just interested in reading some of Henryjames, this is one of his easier reads. Daisy Miller was written in 1879. It is a short novella, so it's easy to get through, and it is a great introductory glimpse into the style of Henryjames's work, what some of his standard themes are, and motifs and things like that. So let's get started, and I will do chapters 2, 3, and 4 in a separate video. There are 4 chapters to Daisy Miller. So this book here is Daisy Miller in Washington Square, which has both stories. These are 2 separate stories. I will be covering Washington Square maybe next week in another video. So for the most part, you may have heard me discuss Henryjames as one of my favorite British authors. I do want to make it clear that Henryjames was not British technically. Henryjames is an American. He was born in America. His parents were American. He identified himself truly as an American. However, he spent a lot of his schooling overseas or in Britain, and in his later life, he did become a British citizen. So Henryjames was what they call a transatlantic writer, one of the very first, and so he brilliantly writes in most of his work about the contradiction of European versus American societal norms and how they contradict one another, and his fascination with culture and society in the 2 countries at the same time period, which we see in most of his work, and it's not something you really see anywhere else. So let's get started with this. I have this all marked up. However, I do mark on all my books. However, I also use the Bookly app. In my Bookly app, I write down quotes and thoughts and new words I come across, and then I print it for my notes when I'm teaching as well. So this is just my Barnes & Noble Classic Edition version. You can find an inexpensive version. I think there's another one I use for some of my students. I can link that below from Amazon if you're interested as well. So this is a great starting point. So a little bit about Henryjames. Henryjames went to law school, and he quickly became a magazine writer. He wrote for magazines. He was very popular, very beloved, very entertaining. His readers loved him. His publishers loved him, before he moved into teaching novels. So I can't say exactly where Daisy Miller, falls on his sort of long repertoire of successful works. Overall, he wrote 22 novels. He also had some poetry, some short stories, and things of that nature. Don't believe it was one of the earliest. It doesn't really matter. When I teach Henryjames, I do not require or chronological reading, because there's so many themes that overlap in his work that it really doesn't matter. Literary scholars such as myself may say that there are Henryjames's early works and there are Henryjames's later works, or his end of life works. So he did evolve and change as a writer as time went on, but he stayed true to his interest and to his themes and to his fascination with studying societal roles and cultural norms and injustices and prejudices in society. So let me get my notes here. So, and also I do want to say that Henryjames was disappointed and frustrated a lot of his readers and publishers in his books, because Henryjames was not a fan of a happy ending, which is kind of uncommon in literature. I mean, Henryjames wanted to write about what's real, the complexities of life, the difficult misery, stress, grief, loss, pain, frustration, the human plight, and the joys and how they balanced it out. He wanted to portray his characters as real. He wanted his books to be portrayed as real as possible for what human life was like. And in a way, his one underlying theme in all of his work is the life unlived, or the human plight. And so be aware if you're reading like The Wings of the Dove, Dead, 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 or Portrait of a Lady, or if we're reading what we're going to talk about in Daisy Miller, you know, dead, dead, dead. Not that quote, but that indicates where this is going. We get frustrated because at the end of his books, we want to see the characters we've come to love and respect and enjoy have a happy ending, and oftentimes we don't. And you know, that's actually, to me, why he's one of my favorite authors. It is fascinating. And you know, we can read plenty of modern day romance fiction, or even suspense fiction, or anything that, you know, women's fiction in this day and age, where there's a particular publishing structure writers need to follow to be traditionally published, which, you know, ends up with happy ending or closure or something of that effect. We're not going to see that so much in Henryjames novels, but we're not reading Henryjames so much for the story, the entertainment. We're reading for the language, the themes, the historical lessons, the view into society during his day and age. That is what we're reading Henryjames for, okay? So let me look at my notes. I think we'll start with, I'll talk a little bit about chapter 1. So again, this is a short story. Well, more of a novella than a short story. Chapter 1, I would say, okay, the overall theme of his Daisy Miller story is, I would say, the analysis of traditional views of society and living the unlived life, and or grieving the unlived life. So this is a theme we see running through Daisy Miller, and the motifs we see are meant to support that. So let me give you a brief overview. Daisy Miller, we have in chapter 1, we have a young American man. His name is Mr. Winterbourne. He is in Geneva, in Switzerland, at a very well-known hotel that is meant to attract and frequent rich people, particularly rich Americans. He has come from several other places in Europe. He's coming through there to visit his aunt, Mrs. Costello, who is a wealthy widowed aunt. And his aunt is old school, just old school values and morals and old money. Whereas we see her nephew, Mr. Winterbourne, and particularly in the character of Daisy Miller, we see new money, modernness, higher upper class, but not necessarily wealthy class. We see more freedom, independence, individualism. Whereas the people like Mr. Winterbourne's aunt and others in society would view women, or particularly women, I guess we could say, in the case of Daisy Miller, this new age of individualism and as loose morals, like women having loose morals because they are not as compliant with structure when it comes to societal behavior, societal expectations in communication, in actions, in structure. So we see a breaking away of structure. We see the sort of juxtaposition, and we see, the conflict of the generation of older money and rigid societal norms, which has more European influence. And then we see the American side, which is, especially the younger generation, with the more free-spirited, branching away, individualism, freedom, things I already mentioned. So we see that clearly in going into chapter 1, more in chapter 2. So in chapter 1, Mr. Winterbourne, he's perusing the grounds. He comes across a little boy. The little boy he befriends, he talks to. The little boy is a very interesting character and entertaining to Mr. Winterbourne. And the little boy briefly and promptly introduces Mr. Winterbourne to his very, very pretty, and this is how Mr. Winterbourne sees Daisy Miller, pretty. She's all about her appearance. Pretty young girl. This is Daisy Miller. And from the get-go, he's fascinated by her. She is witty, talkative, outgoing, almost flirtatious. She's bold. She's insightful. She's just every single thing that you would not see in a European woman, especially a younger woman, unmarried woman in Europe. And this is where Henryjames likes to write that juxtaposition between that society and the American society, which we see in a majority of his work. So Daisy Miller, she, they're talking, they're walking the grounds, they're getting to know each other while watching the little boy play. he is just beguiled by her because she's not like anyone he's ever met. And you'll see it's referenced. He wonders if she's I think they call it a coquette, something. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. Basically, a woman of loose morals, like a harlot. I think it's indicated he wonders if that's what she is, but then he quickly realizes it's not. She's just naive and different, and he finds that entertaining. Like, she is a plaything to him and a pretty thing to entertain him. And so we quickly associate Mr. Winterbourne in this first chapter as being an antagonist, kind of a jerk, kind of a womanizer, kind of. But he's more like in the middle of the influence of his aunt and the society he came from. He did some schooling in Europe of what women are supposed to be like, how they're supposed to behave, how they're supposed to act and look, and how they're supposed to talk. And he's torn because he's younger and he's a little more fresh and he's American. He's also enthralled with this concept of breaking away from that, women who are different, women who are more independent and talkative and breaking all the rules. Like, he finds that a little bit exciting. There's actually a quote I wrote down where it's indicated. Yeah, here's one of my favorite quotes. He had it sent to the idea. No, so as time goes on, let me back up. She convinces him to go to her castle with her. She wants him to immediately take her out on a boat, his boat ride late at night alone, which is totally not something that would happen with a young unmarried woman. Or she could, no joke, in old world society, could be banned from matrimony for life. Going anywhere alone with a man, especially alone at night on a boat or to a house. Your image was everything if you wanted to have a chance at a future, if you were a young, unmarried woman. And so she's like, hell with that. Like, I want to go on a boat. I want to do this. And, she doesn't seem to think about that or care. So in a way, we see her as very, very, like, brave and courageous, and like we feel a little bit of that feminist movement in there, but at the same time we're thinking she is like a little bit cuckoo, and she's really gonna better be careful, she's gonna screw up her life. Like, we think she's like really naive as to what her consequences could be for what she's doing. So anyway, so over time he goes with her, he goes to the castle with her, and they go on the boat, and then he starts to have this change, like, oh, maybe she's just a normal girl. Like, now I'm bored. So here's a quote. He had it sent to the idea. He ascended to the idea that she was common. Was she, after all, or was he simply getting used to her commonness? Her conversation was chiefly of what meant a physician's term, the objective cast, but every now and then it took a subjective turn. So the point here is that it baffles him that she seems intriguing and exciting and different at first, but then when they're alone, they spend more time together, she becomes kind of like a normal, just a person, just a normal girl. So Henryjames clearly wants us to view Daisy Miller through Winterbourne's eyes only, and not have our own opinions. Like the whole story is written where you see Mr. Winterbourne changing what he thinks of her, wondering about her, trying to analyze her, having introspection about her, being confused by her, and clearly he wants the readers to go through those same series of emotions and see what he sees. And when you break away from that and you start analyzing literature, it doesn't necessarily match up with what he sees. So in chapter 2, I believe it's at the end of, is it the end of chapter 1? Anyway, when they're strolling these grounds in the evening. No, chapter 2. So he goes to see his aunt up in the hotel. He tells his aunt he met this girl. The aunt already knows about the girl, Daisy Miller, her mother, and the boy. She clearly says she can't associate with them because of, I guess, their background, where they're from, or whatever their deal is. They're below her. It would not be good for her image to be seen with this family. So we see that immediately up front. So the aunt, Mrs. Costello, is kind of antagonistic. She represents old world Europe, old world values, or even older society of some of American society as well, which that just, you don't you don't associate with people that are below you. You don't associate with women who are there without their husbands. You don't associate with young girls without a chaperone, etc., etc. She makes a comment that she thinks Daisy Miller is having intimacies with the mother or the family's courier, which I think was like a butler. I'm not really sure what the courier is. His name was Eugenio. And he's there to kind of look after Daisy and pops up every now and again, says your food is ready. So she kind of spreads rumors, gossip. So she's of that nature. So Winterbourne goes back down to the grounds at night and runs into Daisy wandering the grounds again. And that's where Daisy introduces Winterbourne to her mother. Her mother, and this is another very interesting, uncommon societal surprise. Like we see, the mother does not seem to be bothered that her daughter is walking the grounds at night with this man. In fact, Daisy says that my mother generally doesn't like to meet my men. Also, Daisy had bragged regularly, and I quote, "I have always had a great deal of gentleman's society," which makes the reader, through the eyes of Mr. Winterbourne, wonder, is she a harlot? Is she a tramp? Is she, a coquette? Whatever. And Daisy was saying she misses society from where they came from before coming to Geneva. She misses society. I've had a great deal of society, particularly of gentlemen's society. And she just brags all about it, and she's fine with it. So she's a little naive in that manner. And then she tells him, my mother doesn't like any of my gentleman friends. She is downright timid. She always makes a fuss if I introduce a gentleman, but I do introduce them almost always. If I didn't introduce my gentlemen friends to my mother, she said in her soft, flat monotone, then I shouldn't think that I was natural. So she thinks it's perfectly normal to have all these male suitors, and as long as she's introducing them to her mother, she's normal. Now, she's, again, kind of naive about the image that this is casting about her in, society at this time. She seemed to him an extraordinary mixture of innocence and crudity. So she was bold, rude, almost crude, but also innocent that there's anything wrong with that, which makes her kind of like endearing. At first, we kind of feel like sorry for her, but then over time, we see that I'll get to that in chapter 2. I don't want to give that away. Or chapter 3 and 4, which will be a separate video. So here's an example. When he goes up and talks to his aunt in the hotel, he tells her he went boating with Daisy. And the aunt says, she went with you all alone? All alone, he said. Mrs. Costello sniffed a little at her smelling bottle. And that, she exclaimed, is the young person you wanted me to know. Huh. So here we have the aunt judging someone she's never met, because this girl must have loose morals or no values and be of a lower, like, scum of the earth, lower class, because she's went somewhere alone with her nephew. So we see the unfairness of that older world judgment and prejudice because of someone who steps out of what they're supposed to be doing societally in their role. So, and anyway, when meeting Daisy Miller's mother, the mother was like uncomfortable having to meet him. She was lecturing Daisy about having her shawl. When Daisy said right in front of her mother, I want him to take me out on my boat, the mother didn't try to stop her, didn't really say, you shouldn't, you can't, take someone with you. I think the courier, Mr. Eugenio, who was more disturbed by it than the mother. So imagine what a mother of a unmarried, marital eligible girl would be saying in certain social circles in both Europe and some parts of society in America. So the mother was out of the box abnormal. Daisy Miller is out of the box abnormal. They are oddballs, and that is why Mr. Winterbourne is fascinated with them, but he's also disturbed. So there's a little bit of that eerie, like, I like this, but I'm not sure what to make of it, which is really kind of fascinating to read about. So chapter 2, we get into some more discussions and argument. I have some more quotes here I wanted to share. Chapter 2 is mostly about the aunt. The aunt is the matronly figure of Mr. Winterbourne. Daisy Miller's mother is the matronly figure of her, and you can see how they both collide, son, aunt. daughter mother, and these two completely different worlds, how they are kind of clashing over the friendship slash maybe courtship of Mr. Winterbourne and Daisy. So you get this real sense of tension and discomfort, and it's kind of cliffhanger-ish. Like when each chapter ends, like, where is this gonna go? Like, I have to find out, because it doesn't seem like it's gonna have a good ending, which it doesn't. So at the end it says, yeah, so Mr. Winterbourne, and when we're getting into talking about this is interesting. I wrote some notes here. Yeah, so this is the kind of book where if you, Henryjames is saying, if you stand out based on your sex, age, class, race, location, geographically, if you stand out against what is normal, life will be not pretty for you. So you are expected to fit in to where you're supposed to be in your place. But because so many people did that, most people did that, that's where he gets into the theme of the life unlived. Daisy Miller is trying to break free from that. She doesn't even care. She wants to be who she is. She wants to live her life. And, you know, men obviously had more freedom than women did in this day and age. But we see this kind of, this girl who is not the pretty parasol, ruffles, you know, pearls, demure, looking for to land a husband. She's just the complete opposite. And that is, she herself is the embodiment of the theme throughout the book. Now, when we're looking at things like symbolism, so if we're looking at symbols, if you need to know for an essay for Daisy Miller, the name of Mr. Winterbourne and the name of Daisy Miller, the characters are the symbols, right? So a daisy is blooming, it's flowering, it's fresh and spurting and growing and waving in the breeze and lighthearted and flourishing. Well, Winterbourne, winter is cold, it's stifling, things are dead in the winter, it's cold. And he, you know, we see the contradiction between the two. So if you didn't catch the names were crafted in a way to be symbolic of the message of the underlying theme. So regarding motifs in Daisy Miller, we see the motif of innocence. And motif is meant to support an overall theme repetitively throughout a book. So innocence, did I write down, was there another motif? Maybe there might be another one I can discuss in the second video. But yeah, innocence is used three ways as a motif. So we have through Mr. Winterbourne's eyes, Daisy Miller being ignorant. And she's innocent in the way she's ignorant of things she says, how she acts. And it can be blamed on maybe not having proper education or mothering, you know, that nature. We have also innocent in the way of naive. She's naive as to the consequences of her actions or to what she thinks she can get away with because she's an innocent. She hasn't been properly coached or educated or trained on her expectations of her role. And lastly, we have innocence used in the way through his eyes later in the book, on the story of innocence as in she's actually innocent in her actions as well, not to be blamed for certain things through Mr. Winterbourne's eyes. So later on in a letter, well, this won't be till the second video, but we see him write, he changes his whole opinion of her, that she is a social rumpus, that either things are over her head or beneath her notice. Like she's just completely oblivious to things. And who do we blame? Do we blame the mother? Do we blame her educators? Do we blame her absence of a father? Father's away on business. Do we blame society? Do we blame the Americans because, you know, American society is a little bit more relaxed and loose compared to British society? I mean, who do we blame? And that's part of underlying a kind of another motif there is blame. It's where does, you know, who's responsible for this and for that and for this, and all these different factors are shown, and you can kind of be left to analyze what is the true culprit of her naivete, her innocence, her ignorance, and so or do, you know, if you're going to write a paper about Daisy Miller, some great topics would be the contradiction of the two sets of characters of parental roles, because the aunt acts as a parental role to Mr. Winterbourne and how they contradict one each other, and the influence of the aunt on Mr. Winterbourne and the influence of the mother on Daisy, and how they then portray society and therefore act with one another. You can write about the underlying theme. The underlying theme here is social prejudice of societal roles as well. We have that ongoing theme in the book. Societal prejudice exists in all cultures. It doesn't matter which side you're on, which country, which continent, it exists, and how does it play out in this book. You can write about the symbolism of the names. I mean, there are a lot of topics you can do with Daisy Miller, and I do want to say Daisy Miller is much easier to read than many of other Henry James's work. It's shorter, it's quick, and publishers and even readers at the time were saying that it's light, it's fresh, it's witty, it's breezy, it's like a spring cleaning. It has more of a younger feel, like than some, like, if you know, we're talking about the ambassadors, for example, like, or the Europeans, some of his bigger books, much more heavier and complicated, and sometimes long, complex sentences riddled with symbolism and metaphor and analogy. But Daisy Miller is just like a fresh breath of air, of introspective entertainment, I like to call it. So really, this book is like a psychological analysis, is the type of writing. It's psychological analysis. And I think that's about all I wanted to discuss in this book. Yeah, psychological reality, I guess, as you can say, what type of story this is. And it's all about the mind games and how the reality of the societal roles. And so I will do a separate video with chapters 3 and 4, and we'll discuss it further if you want to put everything together to write a paper, or if you're just looking to learn more about Henry James. I absolutely love it. I will recommend a copy or two that I've used for my students in the past below. Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video, subscribe, and I'll see you again to talk about Henry James.